Usually, when you find yourself walking through a major city, right, and you stop to look at a really magnificent skyscraper, your eyes are just immediately drawn
Oh,
upward.
absolutely. Yeah.
You stand there on the sidewalk, you crane your neck back, and you just sort of marvel at the glass and the steel. You see the gleaming facade catching the sunlight, the clouds reflecting, and you just think, wow, what an incredible piece of architecture.
Right. Because it's the natural human response.
Yeah,
I mean, we are totally captivated by the surface.
yeah.
We focus on the aesthetic design, the sheer height, that immediate visual impact of the structure. It's beautiful, it's imposing, and well, it's just right there in front of us.
But if you want to really understand why that massive structure is actually standing up, if you want to understand the physics of why it doesn't just, instantly collapse under its own colossal weight looking at the shiny glass, won't help you at all.
No, not even a little.
Right, you have to look down. You literally have to mentally strip away the facade, dig into the dirt, and inspect the poured concrete foundation. You have to map out the unseen rebar and those really deep, load-bearing columns.
Precisely. You have to descend into the unglamorous, kind of gritty underground reality.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, the raw material base is the only thing that allows that glittering superstructure to exist in the air in the first place.
Exactly.
Without the dirt and the concrete, the glass just shatters.
And that transition from looking up at the shiny, beautiful ideas to looking down at the gritty material foundation, that's the exact journey we are taking you on today.
It really is.
So welcome to this deep dive. We are so thrilled you're taking this time with us because our mission today is to, well, dig into the dirt of one of the most consequential and, frankly, controversial architectural blueprints in modern history.
We're getting our hands dirty today.
We really are. We are unpacking a foundational text from the mid-19th century. We're looking at Volume 5 of the Marx and Engels collected works, which basically covers the highly pivotal years of 1845 to 1847.
Yeah, and this specific volume it's just a fascinating window into a very distinct, almost electric moment in time.
Right.
It contains their major joint work, the German ideology, along with a few other writings immediately connected to it. And historically speaking, this is where the tectonic plates of their philosophy actually shift.
Which is exactly what makes this so incredibly exciting for us to explore with you. I mean, this text captures a definitive aha moment in history.
Really?
This is the exact window when Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels solidified their so-called scientific world outlook. It's the moment they hammered out the core philosophical principles that would entirely define their theories moving forward.
The absolute foundation.
But before we start digging into the historical concrete and the rebar, let's just lay our cards on the table. We all know that Marx's theory is, well, it's highly politically charged.
Very much so.
Right. So our goal today is not to tell you whether this philosophical building is a utopian dream home or like a dystopian prison.
Right.
We are not here to endorse the politics or take any side. We are strictly here to act as your impartial building inspectors.
I think building inspectors is just the perfect way to frame it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we are looking for the structural logic. We want to understand the causality they were mapping out based entirely on what is contained in this original historical source material. No more, no less.
Exactly. So let's grab our hard hats and unpack this. Because in these blueprints, you are going to find out why Marx and Engels actually issued a really harsh warning that simply sharing poverty would absolutely ruin any revolution.
A huge warning.
Right. We are also going to uncover a pretty bizarre historical mystery, how a whole chapter of their famous manuscript was actually ghostwritten by someone else entirely.
A really fun piece of detective work there.
It is. But to understand any of that, we have to start with the environment that forged these ideas. So take us to the winter of 1845. What exactly is going on that sets this whole thing in motion?
Okay, so to really grasp the energy of this moment, you have to look at the geography and the intense political climate of Europe in the 1840s.
Okay, paint the picture.
In early 1845, Karl Marx is living in Paris. He's been editing a radical newspaper, and, well, he's making a lot of noise.
As he tends to do.
Exactly. Too much noise, in fact. The Prussian government, which at this time is deeply conservative and absolute, is furious about his writings. So they put immense diplomatic pressure on the French government, led by François Guizot, to just get rid of him.
Oh, wow.
So in February of 1845, Marx is officially deported from France.
Just unceremoniously kicked out for being a nuisance to the neighboring monarchy.
That's exactly it. He is forced into exile and decides to relocate to Brussels, Belgium.
Why
Well, Belgium at this time is relatively liberal. It's a bit of a safe haven for political refugees, and importantly, it is rapidly industrializing. Then, shortly after Marx arrives, in April of 1845, Friedrich Engels joins him.
Okay.
Engels travels down from Barmen in Germany, where his family actually owns textile mills.
Wait, I want to pause on that dynamic for a second because the energy of this reunion in Brussels feels so palpable, even when you just read the dry historical notes. This isn't just two intellectual friends meeting up at a cafe to complain about European politics over a pint, right?
No, not at all.
This specific meeting acts as a crucible.
It acts as an absolute crucible.
Mm.
You have to remember who these two men are at this exact moment.
Mhm.
They're young, they're brilliantly educated, and they are incredibly frustrated.
Right.
Up until this point, if you look at their earlier theoretical works from, say, 1844, you see a massive amount of philosophical critique. They are constantly arguing with other German philosophers.
Just endless debates.
Endless. But when they reunite in Brussels, between 1845 and 1847, something crystallizes. They realize that just writing critiques of other people's ideas is a total dead end.
So before Brussels, what were they actually doing? Because sometimes history paints them as these, I don't know, fully formed revolutionaries right from birth.
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
Right. Were they just sort of philosophical daydreamers before this? Like just sitting in university salons, debating abstract concepts, and then suddenly in Brussels, they decided to walk the actual factory floor.
That is actually a very accurate way to visualize the shift. Before 1845, they were deeply enmeshed in a group known as the Young Hegelians.
Okay.
Now, without getting completely lost in the philosophical weeds here, the Young Hegelians were followers of the philosopher G.W.F. Hegel, and they were fundamentally idealists.
And what does that mean in this context?
Well, in this specific philosophical context, idealism doesn't mean being optimistic. It means believing that ideas, concepts, consciousness, religion, the world spirit, are the primary engines that drive history forward.
Ah, I see.
The young Hegelians believed that if you wanted to change the world, you had to change how people thought. You had to win the battle of ideas.
So it's kind of if we just write a good enough essay, the monarchy will realize they are wrong and step down 5.
Precisely. They thought human bondage was a result of bad concepts.
Wow.
But in Brussels, Marx and Engels look at the staggering poverty of the Industrial Revolution. They look at the actual textile mills and they realize, no, a philosophical essay isn't going to feed a starving factory worker.
It's just not enough.
Right. So this volume marks the decisive stage where they stop merely criticizing the idealists and build their own positive opposing system. They transition from idealism to materialism.
Huge shift.
Massive. They determine that you cannot understand human history by looking at what people think you and to look at how people survive.
Which brings us directly to the core of what they were building in the German ideology. They didn't just casually throw out the statement, history is actually about the economy.
No. Far from it.
They were much more methodical than that. They laid out a very specific logical chain of causality for how human societies actually evolve. Walk me through that sequence.
Yeah, the logical structure they present in the German ideology is highly systematic. And you're right, it's not just money makes the world go round. They map out a strict sequence of development.
Okay, step 1.
First, you have the development of production. Second, arising from that production, you have what they called intercourse, which is basically their 19th century translation for social relations or social interactions.
Got it.
Third, built on top of those social relations, you get the political superstructure, like the state and laws. And finally, fourth, you have the forms of social consciousness, so religion, art, philosophy.
Okay, I really want to unpack that very first step because it seems like everything rests on it. The development of production, because the text outlines what they call the basic aspects of social activity. And they break this down into 3 main components. First, and this sounds almost too obvious to be a grand philosophical revelation, is the production of the means of subsistence.
Right.
They literally start by saying, before humans can make history, we have to get food, clothing, and shelter so we don't die.
It sounds totally obvious to us now, but in the context of 19th century German philosophy, it was a bomb going off.
Really? Just saying, people need to eat.
Yes, because before this, progressive bourgeois historians or idealist philosophers were writing histories focused entirely on the clash of great ideas or the noble actions of kings or divine providence.
Like it's all just high-level drama.
Exactly. And Marx and Engels are saying, stop looking at the sky. The first historical act isn't a thought. It's the production of material life itself. It's the act of sharpening a stick to hunt or planting a seed to eat.
The first historical act is mere survival, but then they outline the second basic aspect, which I find really fascinating, the creation of new needs. Because once you figure out how to build a rudimentary shelter, you suddenly need specialized tools to fix the roof of that shelter. You satisfy one basic need, and the very act of satisfying it creates a completely new, more complex need that you didn't have before.
Exactly. It creates an engine of continuous compounding development. The invention of the plow creates the need for metallurgy.
Right?
The invention of metallurgy creates the need for mining. It is a constant accelerating wheel of human activity.
And the third basic aspect they list is the reproduction of men, meaning the family. The daily reproduction of the human species, the social relations between husband and wife, parents and children.
Right, and it's totally crucial to understand that Marx and Engels don't view these three things, producing survival, creating new needs, and reproducing the family, as isolated chronological historical phases.
Oh, so it's not step one, then step two.
Exactly. It's not like humans spent 1,000 years doing step one, then moved to step two. These are three aspects of social activity that have existed simultaneously since the very dawn of humanity. They are always operating at the exact same time.
So, putting myself in the shoes of someone trying to grasp the magnitude of this in 1845, why does laying out these three basic aspects matter so much for their grand theory? How does this completely flip the way history was being analyzed?
Because if you start with production rather than ideas, it changes the entire diagnosis of why society looks the way it does.
How so?
Well, Marx and Engels are arguing that the division of society into antagonistic classes, kings and peasants, factory owners and workers, isn't random. It isn't a natural, unchangeable law of the universe, and it certainly isn't born out of some ideological disagreement about the best way to live.
Okay.
The class structure is directly connected to definite, specific stages in the development of production.
So how a society produces its means of subsistence literally dictates how its social relations are structured.
Precisely. If your society's primary mode of production is agricultural land worked by hand, the social relations that naturally arise from that are feudalism lords who own the land and serfs who are tied to it.
The tool determines the rule, so to speak.
That's a good way to put it. The production method dictates the social structure. That social structure then dictates the political state, which finally dictates how the people in that society are taught to think.
Which perfectly sets up what is undeniably the most famous formulation from this entire volume. We are talking about flipping the philosophical script entirely. The quote from the text is this: "Consciousness can never be anything else than conscious being. It is not consciousness that determines life, but life that determines consciousness."
That determines consciousness. It is an absolute massive philosophical pivot. It is the absolute core of historical materialism.
But let me play devil's advocate here, because I think a lot of people hearing this for the first time might instinctively push back.
Sure.
Doesn't that feel entirely backwards to how we usually experience the world? We are raised to believe that big, noble ideas like human rights or democracy or liberty or justice are what actually change the world.
Of course.
We celebrate the power of a single idea to spark a revolution. If life determines consciousness, are they basically saying that our ideas, our beliefs, our art, none of it actually matters?
That is the most common hurdle when encountering the German ideology. It's a very valid pushback. But Marx and Engels are not saying that ideas don't exist or that humans don't act on their beliefs.
Okay, then what are they saying?
What they are saying is that the formation of human consciousness, the very boundaries of what we are even capable of conceptualizing at any given point in history, is immensely influenced and ultimately bounded by our material reality.
So big ideas don't just fall out of the sky into the brains of isolated geniuses.
Right. Ideas are born directly from the material reality and the daily life processes of the people who hold them. To use an extreme example, you cannot have the complex legal concept of intellectual property rights in a nomadic hunter-gatherer society.
Because it just doesn't make sense there.
Exactly. The material conditions, the economic framework required to even generate that concept simply do not exist in that environment.
Because if you're just trying to hunt a mammoth to survive the winter, nobody is stopping to trademark the design of the spearhead.
Right.
The material reality doesn't require it, so the consciousness doesn't invent it.
Exactly. And they take it a step further. They argue that in a society divided by classes, the dominating consciousness of that era is always going to be the consciousness of the ruling class.
The people in charge make the rules for how to think.
Yes. The class, which is the ruling material force of society, the ones who own the land, the factories, the resources, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. They control the printing presses, the universities, the church pulpits.
I want to try an analogy here to see if it tracks with what they are arguing. Tell me if this works. It's like a computer system.
Okay, I'm listening.
They're essentially saying that the software, which represents our consciousness, our ideas, our religion, our culture, doesn't build the hardware. The hardware, which is our material life, our means of production, how we farm, how we run factories, dictates exactly what kind of software is even capable of running on the machine.
I think that's a highly effective way to visualize it. Yes.
So if you have a clunky 1980s computer hardware system, let's call that feudalism, you simply cannot run a modern 2026 virtual reality software on it.
You just can't.
The hardware determines the limits of the software. You can have all the great ideas you want, but if the material base can't support it, the idea goes nowhere.
That is exactly the point. The material base is the hardware. The political and ideological superstructure is the software. And to extend your analogy, the software isn't written by a neutral third party.
Oh.
The software is written by the people who own the hardware, to ensure the hardware keeps running in a way that benefits them.
That is a perfect segue. Let's look at a very specific, very powerful piece of that software they analyze, the political superstructure. Let's talk about the state.
Let's do it.
Because when we talk about governments, we generally have a pretty romantic or at least idealized view of them. We think of the state as the protector of the people, the upholder of the social contract. How does Volume 5 define the state?
Well, if you are looking for romance, you really won't find it here.
Not from these guys.
No. The German ideology completely strips away all of the ideological halo surrounding the government. They provide a specific, highly striking definition of the state. They write that the bourgeois state is nothing more than the form of organization which the bourgeois are compelled to adopt, both for internal and external purposes, for the mutual guarantee of their property and interests.
The mutual guarantee of their property and interests. I really want to hover on that phrase because it means they aren't viewing the state as a neutral referee.
Not at all.
They aren't looking at the government as this benevolent umpire just calling balls and strikes to keep things fair between the rich and the poor. They are viewing it almost like a massive homeowners association, an HOA for the ruling class.
An HOA for the ruling class. I like that. Break down how you see that mapping onto their theory.
Well, think about how a typical homeowners association works in a neighborhood. On paper, the HOA charter usually says it exists for the good of the entire community, right? To maintain harmony.
Right.
But in actual reality, it's an organization created strictly by the property owners. Its entire purpose is to protect their property values, to make sure nobody paints their house a neon color that lowers the neighborhood prestige, and to keep the streets under their strict control.
Exactly.
It exists to guarantee the interests of the people who hold the deeds. If you are just a renter passing through, or if you can't afford a home in that neighborhood, the HOA isn't there to protect you. It is there to regulate you. It is there to keep you off the grass.
What's fascinating is how perfectly that translates to Marx and Engels' critique of the bourgeois state in 1845. They viewed the modern state as an instrument adopted out of pure necessity by the property-owning class.
Just a tool.
Just a tool. Why do they need it? Well, as the text says, for external and internal purposes. Externally, the property owners need an army and a navy to protect their trade routes and their wealth from the property owners of other nations.
The rival HOAs down the street?
Exactly, the rival HOAs. And internally, they need a police force, prison system, and a complex legal apparatus to protect their property from the propertyless masses living inside their own borders.
It's all about protection of assets.
That's it. The core function of the entire massive bureaucracy of the state is that mutual guarantee of property. When you view it through the lens of historical materialism, the state is no longer a divine institution or a noble social contract. It is just the enforcement arm of the economic base.
Okay, so this paints a pretty stark picture. If the state is the ultimate enforcement arm for the wealthy, and the material conditions strictly dictate the ideas and consciousness of the society, how does it all ever change?
That is the big question.
Right. If the hardware determines the software, how do you ever get an upgrade? This brings us to a massive theoretical conclusion in the text, the two material premises of revolution. And I have to admit, when I was reading through the sources for this section, I was genuinely surprised by how incredibly pragmatic they were being.
Yeah, people often are.
This isn't just a call to man the barricades.
It is deeply, almost coldly pragmatic. You have to remember, they are trying to be scientists of history here. Marx and Engels argue that a communist revolution cannot just happen anytime, anywhere, simply because oppressed people have a lot of willpower or because a philosopher wrote a really inspiring manifesto.
Right. You can't just wish a new society into existence because you think it's a good idea. That would be going back to idealism.
Yes, exactly. A revolution requires two absolute non-negotiable material premises. And ironically, both of these premises are created by the development of capitalist bourgeois society itself.
Capitalism has to build the runway.
Capitalism has to do the heavy lifting first. The first premise is a massive, unprecedented increase in productive power, meaning a society that has reached a high level of technological and industrial production.
Okay.
The second premise is mass proletarianization.
Let's define mass proletarianization for a second.
It means the creation of a massive demographic of people who are entirely propertyless, a great mass of humanity that has nothing to sell but their own labor, and who exist in direct, glaring contradiction to an existing world of immense wealth and high culture.
Let's really drill down into that first premise.
Yeah.
The absolute necessity of a high level of production, because the text makes a phenomenal point about the profound danger of what we might call shared poverty.
This is a huge point.
And this is the hook we mentioned at the start of this deep dive. The sources explicitly state that without a massive increase in productive power, any attempt at revolution just means that privation and want is merely made general.
This is perhaps one of the most crucial, yet frequently overlooked, insights in their early writings.
The exact phrasing in the text is so vivid, they warn that if you just share poverty, if you try to overthrow the ruling class and establish communism without enough actual resources to provide a good life for everyone, then the struggle for necessities would begin again, and all the old filthy business would necessarily be restored.
Yeah.
The old fair business. I mean, that is a striking warning from the founders of communism.
It is a striking warning. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of human history we were just discussing, it makes perfect logical sense within their materialist framework.
Oh, so
Think about the mechanics of it. Let's say you have a revolution. You successfully overthrow the monarchs or the factory owners, but your society is still fundamentally poor. You still don't produce enough food to feed everyone. You don't have enough warm clothes. You don't have adequate housing. What happens the very next day?
scarcity remains, the exact same problem you had before the revolution.
Exactly. And where there's material scarcity, there is competition. Human nature, driven by the absolute biological instinct for survival in a scarce environment, will simply reboot the system.
Ah, I see.
People will begin hoarding. Factions will form to secure the limited grain. You will inevitably recreate the very same systems of class antagonism, greed, and exploitation that you just bled to overthrow.
You just end up creating a brand new ruling class who hoards the limited resources and a brand new working class who starves. The old filthy business comes right back through the back door.
And it always will if you don't have abundance.
So what they are arguing is that for a revolution to actually succeed and permanently abolish classes, you must have a society that is already capable of producing massive abundance. You need the factories, the steam engines, the global supply chains, the high level of production that capitalism built.
Yes.
You need capitalism to build the engine of abundance, and then the revolution simply reorganizes that engine so everyone benefits from it.
You've hit on the exact friction point. Communism, for Marx and Engels, is not about romanticizing poverty or returning to some agrarian, simple life.
Not at all.
No, it is about harnessing the immense productive power of modern industry to eliminate want entirely. And this leads directly to their argument about the scale required for such a monumental change. They insist in this text that this revolution cannot be a merely local phenomenon. It cannot happen in just one isolated country.
Wait, why not? If one country has enough factories, why can't they just do it themselves?
Because of a concept they call universal intercourse.
Which means what, exactly?
By this they mean global trade, global markets, the total interconnectedness of the world economy driven by capitalism. Universal competition makes every nation dependent on the economic conditions and the revolutions of every other nation.
Oh, because everything is tied together.
Exactly. If you try to establish communism in one isolated local area, the surrounding capitalist global market will either economically crush you, outcompete you, or force you to militarize to defend yourself.
And militarizing brings back the armies and the state.
Exactly. Which again brings back the old filthy business of the state and class armies.
So because capitalism connects the whole world through trade, the solution also has to be globally connected.
Exactly. Therefore, they argued that empirically, communism is only possible as the simultaneous act of the dominant peoples. It requires replacing local, isolated individuals with what they term world historical, empirically universal individuals.
People who see their connection to the entire globe, not just their local village. But what actually drives these millions of universal individuals to finally stand up and act? What is the psychological breaking point?
That's where alienation comes in.
Right. The text talks a lot about the concept of estrangement or Entfremdung in the original German.
Estrangement or alienation. Marx and Engels argue that this estrangement becomes an unendurable power, a power so intense that men are driven to risk everything to make a revolution only under very specific conditions.
Which are?
It happens when the great mass of humanity has been rendered entirely propertyless while simultaneously staring at an existing tantalizing world of immense wealth and culture that they created but are violently barred from enjoying.
It's the friction. I think about it this way.
Mm.
It's one thing to be poor when everyone around you is poor. If you live in a medieval village and there's a famine, you're all just struggling in the mud together. There's a sort of grim solidarity and shared misery. But it is a completely different psychological experience to have absolutely nothing while you are standing outside the pristine glass window of a society that has generated more wealth, more food, and more luxury than any civilization in the history of the planet.
Precisely. It's the glaring contradiction between the potential for abundance and the reality of mass deprivation.
You are watching the skyscrapers being built, you're mixing the concrete, but you are forced to sleep on the sidewalk outside.
Yeah.
That specific friction between total deprivation and visible, incredible abundance is the unendurable power. It's what sparks the flame.
That contradiction is the motor of modern history for them.
The system creates immense wealth, but structurally denies it to the very people who labor to build it. And according to their framework, that pressure will eventually blow the roof off the structure. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time looking at the massive, sweeping, theoretical frameworks they were building in Brussels. The logic of history, the state, the material premises of revolution.
It's a lot of heavy lifting.
It really is. But I want to shift gears for a moment because alongside all this high-level philosophy, there's actually a bit of a historical mystery tucked into this volume. When you look at the physical manuscript of the German ideology, there is a textual oddity that feels like a detective story.
Yes, this is a fantastic detail for anyone who loves archival history or the actual physical process of how historical texts are created.
That's so cool.
When researchers examine the original surviving manuscript of Volume 2 of the German ideology, there is something very weird going on with Chapter 5.
Right, because most of the extant chapters we have from this 1845 to 1846 period are in Friedrich Engels' handwriting. We know they worked incredibly closely together.
Very closely, yeah.
The historical accounts often describe Marx pacing around the room, chain smoking, and dictating his complex thoughts, while Engels sat at the desk, synthesized the ideas, and rapidly wrote them down. But Chapter 5 is completely different.
It breaks the pattern entirely. Chapter 5 is written in the handwriting of a man named Joseph Weydemeyer.
Who was he?
He was a former Prussian artillery officer who became a socialist and a close associate of Marx and Engels. But it gets stranger.
Oh.
At the very end of this chapter, in Weidemeyer's handwriting, it is signed M. Hess, which stands for Moses Hess, another prominent German socialist philosopher of the time.
So, just to be clear, we have a foundational book credited to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels containing a chapter written out in Joseph Weidemeyer's handwriting and signed by Moses Hess.
That's the physical evidence, yes.
What on earth is going on here? Was this just blatant plagiarism? Was there a mix-up at the printer where they dropped a stack of papers?
No, it wasn't plagiarism or a mistake. What this physical manuscript reveals is the deeply collaborative, almost communal network of radical émigrés operating at the time. It wasn't just Marx and Engels sitting in a vacuum.
Right.
Historical analysis and correspondence from the time suggest a specific chain of events. Moses Hess likely wrote the original draft of the chapter. Then, Joseph Weydemeyer made a clean, fair copy of it in his handwriting.
Okay.
Finally, Marx and Engels took that copy, heavily edited it, added their own framing, and incorporated it into their larger manuscript.
It literally takes a village to write a 19th century critique of German philosophy, apparently.
It really did.
But why did they go to all this trouble? What was this mystery Chapter 5 actually about? And why was it so important that they needed to include Hess's drafted critique in their own book?
To understand why they included it, you have to look at who the chapter was attacking. It was a highly targeted critique of a specific book called Die Neue Welt, or Das Reich des Geistes auf Erden, which translates to the New World, or the Kingdom of the Spirit on Earth.
The Kingdom of the Spirit on Earth. That title alone sounds incredibly grandiose. Very different from the basic aspects of social activity.
It was incredibly grandiose.
Hmm.
The book was published anonymously in 1845, but it consisted of lectures delivered by a man named Georg Kuhlmann. And he delivered these lectures to the Swiss communities of an organization called the League of the Just.
The League of the Just. We definitely need some context on them because they sound like a superhero team, but they play a major role in the real history of the labor movement.
They do. The League of the Just was a secret, underground organization of German workers, artisans, and tailors. It was originally founded by an early socialist named Wilhelm Weitling.
Okay.
They had covert branches operating in Germany, France, Switzerland, and England. They were essentially one of the first international working-class organizations. But at this specific time, in the mid-1840s, the League was heavily influenced by ideas of what was called true socialism.
What made true socialism different from what Marx and Engels were developing?
True socialism was a very idealistic, highly sentimental, and almost religious brand of utopianism.
Just a lot of feeling.
Exactly. The proponents of true socialism talked a lot about universal love, the brotherhood of man, and spiritual awakenings. They completely ignored the harsh economic realities, the need for industrial development, and the gritty class struggles that Marx and Engels were painstakingly mapping out.
So Georg Kuhlmann is traveling around Switzerland, preaching this grand, spiritual, true socialism to the working class members of the League of the Just. He's basically acting like a 19th century influencer, selling them utopian vibes instead of a practical political strategy.
That's a great analogy. He was selling them a spiritual fantasy, and Marx and Engels saw this as highly dangerous to the actual working class movement. Chapter 5 is a brutal, methodical teardown of Kuhlmann's activities, his empty rhetoric, and his dangerous utopianism.
Why dangerous, though? If guys like Kuhlmann are just preaching universal love, why did Marx and Engels feel the need to bring in Moses Hess and Joseph Weidemeyer to help them completely obliterate this guy in print?
Because for Marx and Engels, this wasn't just an academic debate about philosophy. They were actively battling for the soul of the working class movement.
The stakes were high.
Very high. They realized that if the League of the Newsar, just these organized, dedicated workers, fell under the spell of rival, non-proletarian ideologies, the movement would fail. It would dissolve into harmless spiritual book clubs.
Just people talking about being nice to each other?
Exactly. Marx and Engels needed to clear out the sentimental utopian ideas to establish their cold, hard, scientific approach. They wanted the movement to be based on the material reality of production, understanding the state as an instrument of class rule, and recognizing the necessity of industrial abundance.
They didn't want workers daydreaming about a kingdom of the spirit.
Right. They wanted them analyzing the kingdom of capital.
They were desperately trying to get the workers to look at the concrete foundation, the dirt, and the rebar, instead of just staring up at the pretty clouds reflected in the glass.
Exactly. The inclusion of Hess's critique, heavily edited by them, shows how they marshaled their entire intellectual network to combat these rival ideas on every possible front. They were building a unified front of historical materialism.
It is truly staggering how much ground they covered, both philosophically and politically, in just a couple of years in Brussels. Let's do a quick recap to bring this massive architectural blueprint all together.
Good idea.
We started with Marx and Engels being pushed into exile by the Prussian and French governments. They reunite in Brussels, a rapidly industrializing city, and they make a monumental shift. They stop arguing about pure philosophy and turn their focus to the gritty, material reality of human history.
We saw how they systematically outlined the logic of history. They argued that the very first historical act is producing the means of survival,
Right.
and that the specific way a society produces its goods completely dictates its social relations, its laws, and ultimately its consciousness. Life determines consciousness, not the other way around.
The hardware dictates the software. Then we unmask the bourgeois state, seeing it not as a noble protector of all people, or a neutral referee, but as the ultimate HOA of the ruling class, an organization compelled into existence for the mutual guarantee of their own property and interests.
We examine the harsh, necessary pragmatism of their premises for a successful revolution.
Oh, the shared poverty point.
Yes, they warned that without the absolute necessity of massive industrial production, any revolution would just result in generalized want, inevitably leading right back to the old filthy business of scarcity, competition, and class division.
And finally, we explored the physical manuscript itself, solving the mystery of Chapter 5. We saw how they utilized their collaborative network to fight tooth and nail against the utopian true socialists, desperately trying to ground the nascent working class movement in scientific, material reality rather than spiritual daydreams.
It's incredible.
It is a dense, incredibly rich, and complex text that requires you to constantly check your own assumptions.
It truly is the foundation upon which the entirety of their lifelong work was built. Every book they wrote after this, including Capital, rests on the theoretical concrete poured in the German ideology. And there's a specific concept we discussed today that I think is incredibly vital to reflect on in our modern context.
Yes, as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder a way to take this 1845 blueprint and apply it to the world you live in right now.
I love this part.
As we discussed, Marx and Engels argued that universal intercourse, which is their 19th century term for what we would today call global trade, global communication, and the total inescapable interconnectedness of the world economy, was absolutely necessary to create world historical individuals instead of just local, isolated ones.
They fundamentally believed that only when humans were materially connected on a global structural scale could they finally develop a truly universal consciousness that transcended their local village or their specific nation.
Yeah. So look at the device you are listening to this on right now. Look at our hyper-connected digital world today. When you log online, when you interact globally in a matter of milliseconds, consider whether this modern, ultimate form of universal intercourse is actually changing your consciousness, just as these two thinkers predicted way back in 1845.
That's a great question.
Does your material digital connection to the rest of the globe dictate how you see yourself and your place in the world? Is the massive global hardware of the internet actively writing new software in your mind?
It is a profound and perhaps slightly unsettling question to carry with you.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Volume 5 of the Marx and Engels collected works. We highly encourage you to go find the primary sources, read the German ideology for yourself, and see what you find in the dirt.
Happy digging.
Next time you look at a towering skyscraper, remember to think about the foundation buried beneath it. Keep digging, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.